Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. M.N. Gupta, Emeritus Professor from Department of Biochemical Engineering and Biotechnology at Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. We will continue talking about biomembranes today. So this module is called Biomembranes 3 and of course it's from paper Structure and Function of Biomolecules 2. Most of the times, discussions on biomembranes tend to focus on outer plasma membrane of the mammalian system. The membranes in the case of microbial world, especially that of extremophiles, have to deal with different challenges. Cellular organelles also have biomembranes, some one, others two. We look at this and some other aspects before we conclude our discussion on structure of biomembranes. So the objective of this module are to learn about biomembranes of the cells of extremophiles. Extremophiles are the organisms which grow under extreme conditions of temperature, pressure, or the presence of some inorganic anions. And we'll also learn about two techniques which have helped us in understanding membrane structures. These techniques are freeze fracture and deep etching techniques. We'll also learn how fluorescence techniques have helped us in gaining quantitative insight into the movements or motion of the lipids and proteins in biomembranes. So the concept map is that we'll continue to look at the biomembranes and we'll look at the membranous structures of the hyperthermophiles, cytophiles and halophiles. All are very important classes of what we refer to as extremophiles. We'll revisit briefly again the lipid anchored proteins and give a little bit more detail about them. But very important that we will also talk about the movement and the motions of the lipids and the proteins in somewhat quantitative details. So membranes allow selective transport across and movements and motions within their bilayer structures. These multiple objectives, transport, movement, motions, these are met by these assemblies of lipids and proteins. Microbes that live under harsh conditions of temperature, pH, or chloride anion presence at high concentrations, they have tweaked the biomembrane designs to cope with conditions of their habitat. Integral proteins are not limited to biomembrane spanning proteins, about which we have mentioned and will further discuss while talking of membrane transport. These are also lipid anchored proteins. There are also lipid anchored proteins which are essentially lipoproteins, but the lipids of different kinds are involved from those that form bilayers. Fluorescence microscopy with its different approaches have proved valuable in gathering some quantitative aspects of what freedom of movement within proteins and lipids have within these biomembranes. So membranes are outer boundaries of both cells as well as subcellular compartments. All membranes contain lipids and proteins. Some membranes also contain carbohydrates. As we have seen, these are part of the proteins as oligosaccharide chains. The composition of these three components varies from one membrane to another. A good example of this is the inner mitochondrial membrane, which hosts the proteins of the respiratory chain. In both bilayers, lipids are generally free to move around. The rotational movement and lateral movements are not disallowed. However, the transverse movements, which are generally described as flip-flop movement, is highly restricted. These various kinds of movements are shown in this slide. These allowed movements, of course, depend upon the overall membrane fluidity, which, as we have discussed, varies from a membrane to membrane. It can also be said that in turn the extent of these movements along with those of the proteins actually define the overall membrane fluidity. We had discussed briefly the role of the cholesterol in membrane fluidity. Let us further look at it. The role which cholesterol plays at physiological temperatures. If the cholesterol content is increased in the bilayers, we have already said that the overall membrane fluidity decreases. The condensed ring systems of the steroid is rigid and interferes with lateral movement of the fatty acid acyl chains. As this is a property of steroid rings and not just of cholesterol, it is not surprising that in some biomembranes, cholesterol is actually replaced with some other steroids. Maize leaves have 7% by weight cetosterol. Yeast has 4% of ergosterol. Paramecium, which is a silated protist, has 4% of stigmasterol. Sterols also regulate the fluidity at extreme conditions as well as other different growth conditions. Below the membrane transition temperature, presence of sterols prevent highly ordered packing of lipids in bilayers. Bilayers otherwise can pack rather tightly. Self-assembly feature is based upon these being able to order themselves. Above the transition temperature, the bilayer core is on its own and has considerable freedom of motion. Such unrestricted movements would have destroyed any semblance of biomembrane structure. Steroid, of which cholesterol is the most prevalent and an important example, prevent this structural collapse by restricting this motion. In case of different growth temperatures, the organisms, as we mentioned earlier, alter the membrane lipid composition itself. When cultured at high temperature, membrane lipids have higher saturated fatty acid. Thus, both fatty acids of lipids and cholesterol are involved in connecting the membrane fluidity in cells under different conditions. Organisms live and survive under a variety of conditions. The cell membrane design is tailored as a part of their survival kits. Let us see how these things happen. Hyperthermophiles can grow at very high temperatures. Their optimal temperature of growth is more than 80 degrees centigrade. Karl Statter's group in Germany isolated Pyrolobos fumari that can grow at even 113 degrees centigrade. Their enzymes called extremozymes remain catalytically active at even 140 degrees centigrade. What happens to the bilayers at these very high temperatures so that the cellular integrity can be preserved? It turns out that the cells of hyperthermophiles do not have same membrane structure. In case of their membranes, the hydrophobic tails are bonded to form just a monolayer. The presence of monolayer rather than bilayer prevents the collapse of the bimembrane structure. At the other end of the thermal spectrum are psychrophiles. Psychrotolerant organisms can grow at low temperatures of about 4 to 8 degrees centigrade, though they grow better at 25 to 35 degrees centigrade. True psychrophiles grow best at less than 15 degrees centigrade. Their natural habitat is cold environments like Antarctic. For their membranes, these cold psychrophiles use the strategy of having fatty acids with regard to the length of the hydrocarbon chain and unsaturation. To visualize how effective this strategy is, think of margarine. It remains softer than butter at cold temperatures because of the higher content of unsaturated fatty acids. Alkalophiles and halophiles are other examples of extremophiles. Most of the alkalophiles are also halophiles. As outer surface of their membranes is exposed hydroxyl anion, it's a moot question. How does proton motive force exist and leads to formation of ATP for their growth and survival? It so happens that these organisms do not use proton gradient to form ATP. Instead, an ion gradient of sodium ion rather than proton is used to get the required energy. In the next modules, we will talk of pumps and channels which allow transport of polar and charged molecules across the membranes. Right now, it suffices to say that many halophiles have chloride pumps that push chloride anion inside the cells. Halophiles also in some cases accumulate potassium cation inside the cells. These strategies are used to maintain osmotic balance with their external environments. Another class of extremophiles are barophiles. Barophiles are microorganisms that grow better when pressure is more than 1 atmosphere. A bacterial strain MT41 can only grow at least 500 atmospheric pressure. Optimal pressure required is 700 atmosphere. This strain was isolated from marine sediments near the Philippines from a depth of 10,000 meters. We do not know much about their membrane designs yet. Some moderately barophilic bacteria, which can also grow without pressure, have provided some clues. Some key nutrient transport proteins and cytoplasmic membranes seem to be structurally modified. Thus, it is misleading to think that structure of fatty acids and presence of sterols can take care of all contingencies under which cell membranes help organisms retain their shape, integrity, and the required fluidity. Let us look at another interesting example. The bacterium Deinococcus radiodurans is resistant to radiation. While a human cannot survive at 5 Grays level of radiation, this extremophile can survive even 30,000 Grays of radiation. Radiations are ionizing and thereby destroy living organisms. What kind of membrane design the organism has? Suffice it to say that it is important to note that fluid mosaic model is not universal. It may be interesting to recall how the initial clues about membrane structures were obtained. In 1925, Gorter and Grendel extracted membrane lipids from red blood cells. The only membrane in these cells is the plasma membrane, as there are no cellular organelles, so it was an intelligent or fortuitous choice. The extraction was done by acetone and lipids were extracted. Careful estimates showed that this continuous macromolecular layer had an area of 2 times the size of the surface area of red blood cells. As the lipid molecules self-assemble, this floating layer was continuous. The conclusion was that these lipids in the plasma membrane were present as bilayers. As we mentioned earlier, both X-ray diffraction and electron microscopy confirmed the bilayer nature of the membranes. It was freeze fracture electron microscopy which enabled isolation of the separate monolayers. Freeze fracture electron microscopy especially turned out to be valuable for finding that proteins are located in the membrane interior as well. This was not initially believed in view of the hydrophobic interior of the membranes. Thus, freeze fracture electron microscopy helped us in gaining the correct insight about the membrane structure in those early days. Freeze fracture electron microscopy, what is basically done is that cells or membrane fragments are rapidly frozen in the liquid nitrogen. This frozen sample is then fractured by a microtome knife. Microtomes are used to precisely and uniformly cut thin sections of the tissues. It is the tissue which slides through the steel knife and is forced through the knife, resulting in the section. The plane of the fracture is generally in the middle of the bilayer, separating the two leaflets. As this figure shows, it allows us to look at the interior of the bilayer. This becomes possible further because these exposed regions are shadowed by carbon and platinum to create a replica of the middle of the bilayer. It is a combination of this freeze fracture technique with another class of techniques which are called deep etching techniques that helps in looking at these exposed surfaces. The ice covering the adjacent membranes is sublimed in this process, which is called deep etching. The combined technique is called freeze etching electron microscopy. In fact, it is this technique which provided the first evidence that the proteins are present in the membrane interior. The integral proteins, the transmembrane proteins that is, were seen as dense globular particles when examined by the freeze etching electron microscopy. Such particles were seen in the case of erythrocyte membranes and sarcoplasmic reticulum membranes. In any new technique or its new application, validation is important to rule out facts. This was possible by creating model systems consisting of the synthetic bilayers of phosphatidylcholine. These synthetic bilayers then were examined by the freeze etching electron microscopy. It was found that the fractured faces were smooth. Myelin membranes are relatively inert insulators. When examined, these also showed large smooth areas free of the dense globular particles. Some authors distinguish between membrane spanning proteins and integral proteins. In such cases, the latter term refers to the lipid anchored proteins. These proteins are covalently bonded. A significant fraction of the non-peripheral proteins in eukaryotes are lipid anchored. These proteins are linked to the lipids of either of the two leaflets. Prion protein is responsible for what is popularly called mad cow disease. The prion protein is covalently linked via the C-terminal amino acid to the polar head of the phosphatidyl inositol. Many proteins in fact have similar linkages. The linkage is called ethanolamine phosphate trimannose bridge, and the proteins are called glycosyl phosphatidyl inositol anchored proteins. In short, they are called GPI anchored proteins. Sequential addition of sugar residues and ethanolamine phosphate to the phosphatidyl ethanolamine takes place. The protein to be anchored has a signal peptide at the C-terminal, which is removed in the lumen of the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and this preformed GPI anchor attached to the C-terminal. Some proteins are transiently attached to the cytosolic face of the membrane by its N-terminal glycine amino group, forming an amide bond with myristate molecule. We have already referred to these proteins as myristoylated proteins. We also referred to another set of proteins where instead of an amide linkage, a thioether linkage is formed between C-terminal cysteine residues and 15-carbon farnesyl or 20-carbon geranyl polyolefinic chain. If you remember, such proteins are called prenylated proteins. The lipid anchored proteins are involved in some key biological processes. For example, cell signaling G proteins and RAS family of proteins are lipid modified or lipid anchored proteins. G protein coupled receptors are membrane spanning proteins which contain 7 alpha helical regions. On binding its ligand, a GPCR activates the trimeric G proteins with alpha, beta, gamma subunits. The G alpha and G gamma subunits are lipid anchored proteins on the cytosolic face of the plasma proteins. RAS proteins, on the other hand, are examples of monomeric G proteins. These activate a serine or threonine phosphorylation cascade. The G alpha subunit and RAS proteins are also anchored to the cytosolic surface of the membrane. Let us also look at some important examples of peripheral proteins. Their interaction is limited to the surface, but to both inner and outer surface of the membranes. Thus, in case of lipids, it is limited to their polar heads. The cytosolic face of the erythrocyte plasma membrane has a network of peripheral proteins which constitute its cytoskeleton. Cytoskeleton is an internal scaffold and consists of microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules. In case of erythrocyte plasma membrane, the major component of the cytoskeleton is spectrine. This protein has triple-stranded alpha helical coiled coil which form long chains. These chains interact with two other peripheral proteins called ankyrin and protein band 4.1. Ankyrin constitutes a crosslink between spectrine and cytosolic domain of the integral anion exchange band 3 proteins. Band 4.1 one protein facilitates the binding of actin filaments to the spectrin chains which link them to the cytosolic domain of glycophorin. Like with other cells, cytoskeleton of erythrocyte cells provides both strength and flexibility to the plasma membrane. In other cells, though, cytoskeleton crisscrosses the cytoplasm. Nucleus has inner and outer membranes which fuse together at nuclear pores. These pores allow transport between nucleus and cytoplasm. The outer nuclear membrane is continuous with the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is a network interconnected with membrane vesicles. Golgi consist of flat membrane bound sacs. Mitochondria has both inner and outer membrane. In addition, these are interconnected flattened vesicles which assume the shape of disc called thylakoids, which are present in the plant cells. Lysosomes and peroxisomes both have a single membrane. Peroxisomes have enzymes which degrade fatty acids and amino acids. Their metabolism produces hydrogen peroxide. So these also have catalase to decompose H2O2. Fluorescence microscopy provided vivid proof of how proteins can move rapidly in the membranes. A hybrid cell fusion of a human and mouse cell was prepared. The fluorescent labeled antibodies specific to membrane proteins of each component cells were used to track these marker proteins. Red and green fluorescent labels were used for the two component cells. As expected, the freshly prepared hybrid cells showed segregated red and green patches. However, within 1 hour and at 37 degrees centigrade, the mixing of green and fluorescent molecules was observed. The estimate was that in about 1 minute, a membrane protein can move by several microns. Fluorescence photobleaching recovery technique allows quantitative measurement of the lateral movement of the membrane molecules. In this, a cell surface component is labeled and viewed through a microscope which looks at about 3 micrometer square region. This region is bleached by throwing a light pulse from the laser. It is found that the fluorescence in this region is again recovered with time. What happens is that the bleached molecules move away and the fluorescence molecules move in. The rate of recovery can be related to the diffusion coefficient D as shown in the slide. This powerful technique allowed measurement of the diffusion coefficient of both lipids as well as proteins. Phospholipid molecules were found to move at the rate of 2 micrometer per second. The diffusion coefficient of lipids were found to be of the order of 10 to the power minus 8 centimeter square per second by measurements with a large variety of membranes. Proteins, on the other hand, have a wide range of lateral mobility. Rhodopsin was found to be among the highly mobile proteins with diffusion coefficients of 4 into 10 to the power minus 9 centimeter square per second. Fibronectin, a peripheral protein, has diffusion coefficient of less than 10 to the power minus 12 centimeter square per second. This protein is anchored to actin filaments through integrin. The mobility is thus related to the function of the membrane proteins. Transverse diffusion, sometimes referred to as flip-flop, is the movement of a molecule from one face of the membrane to another. The ESR shows that a phospholipid molecule can flip-flop once in several hours. These measurements were made by preparing phosphatidylcholine vesicles with some molecules labeled with nitroxide spin label. It was found that the proteins do not show flip-flop. It may be obvious now that the biological processes involving membranes are largely mediated by proteins and not lipids. One structural role of the protein is to shape membrane asymmetry. Their own polar nature and selective glycosylation ensures that this flip-flop is not possible. So in this module, we have basically learnt about that the biomembranes of extremophiles and cellular organelles have a somewhat similar design as fluid mosaic kind, but driven by their functional requirements, the structures is slightly different. We also learnt about that because these are insoluble structures, they are not water soluble. So the normal structural, the normal techniques which probe the structures of the soluble molecules or entities soluble in aqueous buffers were not of great help. So that's where techniques like, based upon the microscopic techniques called freeze fracture and deep etching techniques, proved very valuable in not only understanding the membrane structure but also convincing people about the validity of the fluid mosaic model. We also should not overlook the importance of the lipid anchored protein, so we sort of came back and gave little bit more detail about it in this final module on biomembranes. Finally, the lateral and transverse motion within the biolayers of both proteins and the lipid molecules is very important. A major role of membranes is to ensure necessary and selective transport. This is one aspect we have referred to but not discussed in detail yet. We will do that in the next module. So what we have discussed so far are the structural aspects of the diverse biomembranes. Again, it is not by any means a comprehensive view, but enough for us to get an overall idea about how the biomembrane design are simple and elegant, and yet they discharge diverse multiple functions. We will see more of that in the context of the transport of molecules across these structures. Thank you.